All right, psychology nerds, and welcome to another episode of Psychology and Stuff, the podcast out of Phoenix Studios at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. I'm Ryan Martin, one of your hosts of Psychology and Stuff, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host. She's the chair of the UW Green Bay Psychology Program, a statistician, an environmental psychologist, and one of my besties is Dr. Georjeanna Wilson-Dundas. How's it going, G?
Yay, that's the best one yet. I'm not a chum. I'm not the bestie. That is the best one yet. And so it is going super well. I'm so happy. We are recording. This will be the last episode of this season. So it has been a pretty tremendous season with, I think, overall 15 episodes that we've recorded. Learned a whole bunch of stuff from some brilliant people this season. It has been really fun.
Yeah, it's been great. I've had a ton of fun because we've had Allison Jane on a couple times. We had Jason on, I think a couple times. We've had some students on. We had Abby on.
Yep.
We even brought back an intern. I know I'm forgetting something now. I'll feel bad, but we even brought back our intern Kelsey for a special episode on summer movies. McCrae was on a couple times, so
Yep.
just a good season all around as far as showcasing the awesomeness of the UWGB Psych program and others.
Yes, it has been great. It has been fun.
Cool. And today is exciting for me.
Today is such an exciting day. So do you want to say something before I introduce you?
Sure. So I'll just tell people that my new book, How to Deal with Angry People, has come out today, so available now. This is my second book, and I'm really excited to talk about it, and I'm excited it is out there for the world. And so Georjeanna and I are going to do some talking about it. I am serving as guest today, which is always fun.
So fun. It is a really exciting day. I know that we here in the psychology department have been anxiously awaiting this May 9th launch date of your second book. And so we are just thrilled to have you talk about it on the launch day here for Psych and Stuff, although it won't come out until the 11th, but nonetheless, I'm going to do a proper intro. And so he's a faculty member in the psychology department here at UW Green Bay with a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Southern Mississippi. He researches and teaches about emotion generally, but more specifically about anger. He teaches courses in psychopathology and shares valuable information about emotions under the handle Anger Professor on social media and reaches thousands of people across the globe. He has an amazing TED Talk titled Why We Get Mad, and his first book with that same title. His new book, featured here beside me, is How to Deal with Angry People. And it comes out today, May 9th, and is available on lots of different ways to get that. And we were excited to welcome Dr. Ryan Martin.
Wow.
Yay! I feel like I should clap.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it quite a bit, and I am excited to be here talking about this.
Absolutely. So, I was so lucky that I asked for a preview copy of the book because I determined that I wouldn't be able to read it if we were recording this on the day that it was coming out, that I wouldn't be able to quick run to the bookstore and buy one before we are recording this. And so thank you for the advanced copy. I had the joy of reading it this weekend. And I just want to say on the outset that I found this book so incredibly engaging with the stories that you tell and the examples that you give, but also such great advice for everyone, because you don't have to be an angry person to get something out of this book, and you don't have to necessarily have someone close to you in your life who is angry, because we all deal with angry people as we walk through this world together. And so I found that there was something for everyone in this book. So I'm wondering if you could start off by telling us, how did this second book come about? Like, how did you decide that this was the topic that we needed to learn about next?
Yeah, it's sort of funny. It actually goes back a long time, maybe 8 years or so. It starts with actually, I think a mutual friend of ours, or someone we both know, certainly, another professor named Nancy Chick, who sent me a message one day, or maybe posted on Facebook, something along the lines of, "Hey, would you write an essay?" At the time I was blogging for Psych Today. She said, "Would you write something on how to deal with angry people?" And I think it was rooted in some experience she might have had or something like that, but she just wanted some ideas. So I wrote something. It was relatively brief. I posted on Psych Today. I thought that's the end of it, so that was it. Psych Today shared it on their Facebook page, and it ended up getting a ton of attention because Psych Today has got a huge following.
Yep.
But it was interesting because not all of it was nice, right? So not all of the responses were nice. I had people calling me all sorts of nasty names. I had people telling me I was wrong and that the best way to deal with angry people is through, and this is a quote, "a throat punch." And so not everyone agreed with the approach, but overwhelmingly, I mean, I would say there was a lot of positive feedback. A few years ago, when I started talk on TikTok, I did a series that was really based on that. I mean, I basically repurposed that essay and like took sections of it and did short videos about it. And the response was, again, really, really positive. People were asking questions. They were like sharing their own ideas. They wanted to know more. And so I started to, just from all of that, I started to take tons and tons of notes. And then my wonderful editor from my first book, Fiona, wrote me and said, "Hey, how does it sound? Maybe we should write a book about this." And so she approached me about this. But then I think to me, the best part, and the part that I was really excited about, or that's been really fun for me, is over the course of the 2 years I spent writing it, I interviewed a bunch of people that I met over social media. So those case studies you see at the beginning of the book, those are all people many of those are people I met over social media, but also just examples throughout that. Every now and then, if I kind of sometimes stuck, but sometimes just wanted to hear people's thoughts, I would share an idea on TikTok and ask people for their feedback, and people responded in all sorts of interesting ways. And so that part was really fun to me, that this is sort of the work of some crowdsourcing in a lot of ways.
And one of the things that I found really interesting at the beginning of the book is the percentage or the amount of people who reported, like in research and actual empirical research, but also who responded to your social media queries. So many of us have lots of experience dealing with angry people. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so as I've said before, places, and we'll say again, I'm certain, I wish we had sort of like an anger thermometer, right? That told me, like, if we had sort of real-time data on how often people themselves got angry, but also how often people were encountering angry people in their day-to-day lives. And I can tell you, we don't have that data, but the data we do have says it's pretty common, right? And so we've got one piece of data that says about a third of people will say that they are, and this is actually a little bit old, and I bet it's higher now, but will say that they either have a family member or a close friend who is an angry person, right? So that's a chunk, right, of people who are saying that. But then add to that, I'm pretty sure that's minimizing things because it doesn't account for coworkers, and it doesn't account for those just day-to-day run-ins that we might have, or frankly, even which those day-to-day run-ins can be way worse depending on what your job is. And so, quick little anecdote: I've been to the post office twice this week, mailing copies of my book when I'm there, and both times, two different people have looked at it and said, "Oh, we need this here." And so, we know there are particular jobs where people are way more likely to encounter angry people in their day-to-day life. Seems like post office might be one of those based on that anecdotal data, but we know other sorts of service providers. I start the book off talking about librarians having dealt with angry people, but also flight attendants. This is a group that I was contacted about early on, or about how there's been a lot of trouble there. So, we know that there are some people who really interact with and deal with angry people often.
I wonder if we might go back and do a little bit of definition just to be clear what we're talking about, because I think that there's a difference in vocabulary about an angry person versus angry people. Right. That seems different to me. Can you give me some clarification about like trait versus state kind of anger?
Yeah, and so this is one of the things I try to cover early on, as that there are, when you think of any emotion, and you can think of it as being like a state. So in this case, an angry person, meaning I am angry right now, and I've been provoked, and right now I'm feeling that emotion that we all feel, right? And so we can all enter that angry state from time to time. But then there's also what we call trait anger, which is a person whose anger is more of a personality characteristic. And in that case, the angry person they are more likely to get angry in their day-to-day life. They get when they tend to get angrier than most people do. They also tend to express that anger in more sort of maladaptive ways. And so this book is ultimately for both, in the sense that there are strategies for people who are dealing with both, but there's also acknowledgement that some people, like, they live or work with an angry person, meaning person with an angry personality, and other people, it might be more of I encounter angry people who are sort of angry in the moment routinely because of my job or something like that.
Absolutely. And I feel like in the latter example, like when you run into angry people, you don't know if it's a state or a trait. Yep. Like it could be like a person who has an angry personality, angrier in the moment because of that as well. And so I think that that's really important. I also wanted to say, because you say it at the very beginning of the book and throughout, can you just clarify, there's a difference between an angry personality and an abusive person? And can you just clarify that from the get-go?
Yeah, this was really, really important to me, and it's frankly, it's come up a lot on social media actually since, over the last month or so since I've been talking about it. I want to be very clear at the absolute outset. This book is not intended to be a field guide for people to tolerate abuse. And far from it. That when it comes to emotional or physical abuse, that is not the intent here. And people should, frankly, flee those situations and get to safety. In fact, one of the first things I try to tell people is, hey, if that's you, set this down, and here's some resources to get some help. Yeah. I think one thing that's important to note too is that, and I think people gravitate towards the assumption that the angry person in their life is being angry toward them, and potentially hostile or cruel to them. And that is not always the case. It's sometimes the angry people we deal with in our day-to-day life they don't take our anger out on us. They take their anger out on the world. And it might be scary for us as people who live with them or people who, spend our time with them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are abusive or cruel or hostile to us. And I think that is really important, that the goal here is not to encourage people to just sort of take it. Far from it. Oftentimes it's about finding ways actually to stop that sort of abuse and stop that sort of hostility. And just a sort of side note, one of the things I've heard from people, and I absolutely 1000% understand where this is coming from, people saying, well, why is it my responsibility to learn how to deal with angry people? Why isn't it their responsibility to learn to be less angry? And that's totally fair. And I would say, ultimately, it would be great if everybody did the work of dealing with their own anger. The problem, though, is that not everyone will. And oftentimes we are powerless to make them, to do that work. And so the question is, if you have to interact with angry people, do you want tools to be able to do it effectively or not? And knowing full well that we can't change the people around us, even when we really want to.
And I wonder if that might lead us to a good segue about wanting to change people. I feel like that's a human nature kind of thing. Like you want to change people to be better for you, maybe,
Right.
in the world. And I think anger is such a strange emotion compared to something like sadness. If I know somebody who is clinically sad or depressed, I would call it, then I know the tools that I would share with them to have them seek help. But I'm not sure I would give the same advice to an angry person in my life. Is that common? Is that a way that we deal with angry people?
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting, because I think sometimes, some of it has to do with where the motivation might be coming from, in the sense that, if you, to use your example, if you know a person who is sad and you're concerned about them, then part of the reason you might give them those resources is for them, right? It wouldn't necessarily be for you. It would, I mean, it might be because you're their friend, but I mean, it's more because you want to help them help themselves. Whereas if it's an angry person, that same motivation might be a different motivation. It might not be because you're trying to help them so much as you're trying to help the people around them, and who might be the sufferers of that anger. That said, I mean, I do think, emotions, they go together so often, that often, angry people are, they are regularly also sort of tortured by that. And I use that example in, I think, chapter 5, maybe not, maybe chapter 2. I use that example of a former client of mine who described not wanting to be a tyrant, and talking about, and it was such an interesting example because he was someone who was being very cruel to his partner at the time, and but then was filled with deep, deep, deep regret afterwards. And there was a piece, and for the record, I know that's a pattern of abuse, and that's not uncommon at all, but it says something about the degree to which he was sort of both engaging in things that he couldn't seem to stop himself from doing in the moment, but then also tortured by it later and really suffering emotionally in other ways later. I know I've gotten far afield from your question, but it is, for him, the thing he was coming to see a therapist about was his anger problem. He was tortured by it. It wasn't just that his friends didn't like him when he was mad.
Right. So I wonder if you might share some of the evidence-based advice that you share in the book about how do we deal with angry people, and you can pick whatever one you want and whatever might be your favorite. That would be great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is probably most important to me is actually the first strategy that I talk about, which is to really figure out in those moments what your goal is. And what I mean is, so you're in some situation where a person is angry with you, and regardless of how they are expressing it, or maybe they aren't angry with you, they're just angry. But regardless of how they are expressing it, take a moment and figure out what outcome you want. And this could be true if you're on the interstate. It could be true if you are working behind the counter somewhere. It could be true if you are online, right? And someone's said some things to you online, made it evident on social media they're angry with you. Take a moment and figure out what your goals are, because a lot of times we're not thinking clearly in those moments, and we do things like we think about how we can get back at the person, or how we can how we can lash out at the person and hurt them in some way. And even though that's a common response, it oftentimes isn't a productive one. It doesn't typically get people where they want to go, And so, for instance, if someone's angry with you and you're on the road, I would argue your goal should be to get to your destination safely. Rarely with that goal in mind is the answer giving the person the finger, honking at them, cutting them off, anything like that. None of those things actually lead to that outcome. In fact, more often than not, getting away from the person is the thing that's most likely to lead to that outcome. And so, same thing, if you are arguing with someone online, or if someone's mad at you online, is your goal really to change their mind? That doesn't happen very often online. So what is a more realistic goal, and how can you get there? And there might be infinite routes to that, but just figure out what's the best route for me, what's the most likely route to get where I'm going.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the advice you share in this book, it is all about the person who is being interacted with by the angry person, how they regulate their own emotions and their own emotional response. Would you say that that's true, that a lot of it has to do with our own emotion regulation?
Yep. Yeah. It isn't. The thing that makes anger so interesting, I think, compared to a lot of other emotions, is that it is like, oftentimes we call it or refer to it as a social emotion, meaning it most often occurs through these social interactions in ways that some other emotions don't necessarily happen that way. And so what that means is that two people at least are oftentimes sort of playing off each other. So if a person's angry with me, chances are I'm going to respond with my own sort of sense of maybe it's my own anger, maybe it's fear, maybe it's guilt because I know I did something wrong, maybe it's defensive-ness, whatever. I'm going to respond with my own stuff. And part of learning to be productive in these situations is learning to deal with that stuff. And so how do I manage to stay calm when someone is mad at me? How do I manage to, one of the places or chapters is about sort of figuring out if their anger is justified, right? Maybe I really did screw up and they're angry with me, and they are correct to be angry with me. Doesn't mean that they're correct they're right to yell at me or anything like that, but their anger is justified. How do I deal with the defensiveness I might be feeling in that moment? How do I deal with that sort of feeling of anxiety that comes up where I want to protect myself? How do I learn to apologize and make up for that mistake in some way?
I think you bring up a lot of thoughts about timing and the timing of a response or engagement or whatever you might call it. Even that the first example that you gave, about figuring out your goals, that takes a second.
Yeah.
And I find that is particularly challenging when I'm interacting with an angry person face to face, like in person. And so not online anger, but rather, and not even over the phone, but like you're looking the person in the eye. It's really challenging, I think, to be like, okay, like pause for a moment, breathe, and figure out, like, what am I doing? Do you have any thoughts about response time and things like that?
This is, I think there are a handful of questions that I get over and over and over again that some of them there is no answer, and then some of them are just really hard to answer. And this is one of those where it's just really hard to answer because, ultimately one of the skills that every human being can benefit from that is just exceedingly difficult and can only happen with practice and reflection and intentionality and all sorts of things is learning to stay calm in any particular moment. That it is, I had a friend or a coworker refer to it as finding your pause. And it's a really interesting, it's like this being able to develop essentially a pause button in those moments, even if it's just for a half second, to sort of take that moment and be able to take a breath and collect yourself and respond. And I mean, I think the way it happens is there's a couple ways. One, people get better at it if they actually sort of can anticipate some moments when someone's going to be, when they might endure anger. If they can anticipate that and sort of plan on it, it's easier to find that pause button. It's also one of the things that I encourage people to do is to reflect back on these emotional interactions sometimes and actually think about where they might have been able to pause, whether they did or not, and actually to take that moment. People play, and I'm one of these people, they play out their emotional moments in their head over and over and over again. But usually especially with anger, they end up being a little more fixated on what the other person did than what they did, and I think that sometimes in that experience, actually asking yourself, okay, where might I have done something differently? I liken it to athletes watching game tape or game footage and thinking about, okay, what's a different decision I could have made here that would have changed the trajectory of things? Not from the perspective of blaming themselves or being self-critical, but just from the perspective of how do I learn to navigate these situations differently in the future? And I think that that's a really important skill and practice to engage in, because it does take time to learn to sort of to stay calm.
What about I'm thinking about like education and training and helping people to develop some of those very skills that you were just talking about. Is there room for helping people train for such interactions, both the angry person maybe and the recipient of that anger?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, in therapy, for instance, role playing is a very common approach that therapists will use, not just with anger, but with any sort of experience. And especially, I mean, oftentimes it's used for people who are sort of anticipating enduring a difficult encounter, right? And so, hey, I'm going back to see my mom this weekend, and I haven't seen her for a long time, and I'm thinking about a specific case right now, by the way. And when I've done that in the past, it's been uncomfortable for me. So can we practice? And that's a pretty common thing for people to do. yeah, it works. And you can also use it in ways where it's not necessarily that they're anticipating something. It's just um, uh, you just kind of pick a scenario and run through it and give people some practice with that. It's also another sort of common therapy for people who deal with their own anger is some sort of visualization of frustrating experiences. You can do something similar where you're not necessarily role playing, but you're just visualizing a case where a person is angry with you and expressing that anger, and how you can sort of visualize that and think through how to, all those things are essentially practice.
I was thinking about when you were talking about like that sometimes I feel like anger or interacting with an angry person is like dealing with fire, and that you can make the fire worse, you can make the fire less, you can get burned or you can not get burned. And I was thinking about the educational thing that at least I went through when I was young, the stop, drop, and roll kind of thing. And I was thinking, like, does that apply here? Is there a training like stop, breathe, and goal or something? Like, is there like some sort of educational mantra we could use?
Yeah, it's funny. I've learned this. By the way, your timing is funny there, because my wife just the other day said she read me a tweet or something where someone said, I guess when I was a kid, I really thought I'd be on fire more often as an adult. Like we were trained so many times to stop, drop, and roll.
Seriously.
But it's funny though, because when I was a kid, I don't think I talk about this in this book, but there was a PSA on Saturday mornings that said something like, when you feel yourself getting tense, stop 2, 3, breathe 2, 3, think your way to sense. They say it's slower than that, but those sorts of like mantras. I mean, I do think that mantras can work, and that those are things people can stop and think in the moment. Maybe not one as long as the one that I just described, but it is sort of your stop. I mean, yeah, your stop, drop, and roll. What is we'll have to think of what the other two things could be, because drop and roll don't really apply in this situation, but there must be
that might be really an interesting way to deal. Somebody's just like reaming you out and you just like drop to the ground and roll away.
I think it makes sense. I can see why someone would do that.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what is a way to deal with an angry person, like when it's more the one-off kind of like the earlier example of the librarian that you were talking about, or the flight attendant, the person you don't know, who's not like a regular in your life? What is a strategy that we can use to deal with that sort of one-off angry person?
Yeah. One of the first things I would say is, I think that if there are employers out there listening to this, I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that you have some workplace policies on, and also some training on, and so that employees kind of understand what their rights are in those situations. And I think a lot of places do and have done this in recent years, which is good. And so that's the first thing I'd say is, like, know what's an okay thing and what you don't have to tolerate, essentially, and be prepared to just end the interaction at that point. But the other thing I would say is, part of what happens in a moment where someone is angry with you and someone's expressing that anger in sort of the typical way, right? Maybe they're yelling, or they're a little bit hostile, or they're directing their anger at you in a loud way. Part of the problem is that people end up sort of matching that, right? They end up expressing, they get elevated in themselves, and they end up matching that, whether it's with their own anger or just their own sort of loudness. One of the things we know is that trying to avoid some of the things that kind of come naturally in that moment, raising your voice, is to try and avoid that, to actually sort of lower and soften your voice a little bit, to to not do things like tell them to relax, things like that have a tendency to just exacerbate their feelings of frustration. I think sometimes just taking a moment to listen and nod and throw out some of those what we call minimal encouragers, right? Let them sort of tell their story, and then when they're done, if it's your responsibility to try and help them solve whatever the problem is, then start working on that. I think that if it's not your responsibility and if there is no solution, then trying to disengage. And again, that's where the workplace policies and stuff like that come into play. But I think that, helping a person feel heard in those moments, and then also getting on their side oftentimes. And so I'm thinking right now, just specifically, about a month or so ago, I was actually asked by our advisors here at UW Green Bay if I could talk to them a little bit about dealing with some, when students are angry, and who knows what kind of thing they might be angry about. But a lot of it was just that. It's okay, so I want to help you solve this problem. First, I'm going to let this anger sort of come out, and then I'm gonna hear you, and then I'm going to get on your side, and we're going to try and solve this problem together. And I think that's a nice example of the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, I was thinking about like the workplace policy kind of thing, and just knowing that your supervisors or your superiors have your back. Yep. In that circumstance can sometimes be all you need to do some really great interacting, is that just knowing that if you do have to like cut and run, which is a very valid thing to do in some circumstances, that they would back you up if you had to. One of the things that I think kind of got popularized by the whole Karen stereotype is that they always want to talk to the highest person on the rung of the ladder, take me to your leader kind of angry outburst. What do you think about that circumstance and how to handle anger, which is clearly like demeaning to you in the moment as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good, I think you're absolutely right about the knowing that your manager has your back, and that's some of the value of that, of those workplace policies, because I think what happens for a lot of people is that they actually start to get worried they're going to get in trouble, right? That they did something wrong. My manager's not going to have my back. This is going to be a customer's always right, and I'm going to have to sort of eat it or look bad, or maybe even worse. And so, yeah, I think that is that's very real. And so being able to feel comfortable that, hey, this supervisor I talk to is going to be able to, that they talk to is going to be on my side, or at least support me after the fact, right? And that can be really important. I mean, I think, ultimately, that in some ways that's sort of freeing when you're the employee, because it's like, okay, it's no longer my issue, right? And we'll see what happens at that point. And again, that's assuming that you feel good about who is in charge and how they're going to handle it.
Yep, absolutely. So I know you've gotten a lot of questions on social media on this topic, and lots of hype about your book. And so I'm wondering if I've missed anything that you hear a lot from people that you want to talk about before we end up today.
I think actually there's one thing I would say. Some of this is questions I've gotten, and some of it's just some stuff that's already in there, is that it actually goes back to that throat strike comment or throat punch comment from the beginning, is that so much of this, I know there are people out there who will read this or hear this and say, this is stupid. I don't, if somebody is angry with me, I don't owe them anything. And I get that. But I guess what I would back up and say is a lot of this really comes down to a, a world view, and how you decide you want to approach the people that you interact with day in and day out, whether or not you want to work with them or work against them. And that I think that some of this really comes for me from a place of even when people are angry with me, whether they are right to be or not, on some level, I try to empathize with them. And what they might be feeling or what they might be going through. Doesn't mean that I justify the behavior. It doesn't mean I say it's okay that you're being cruel to me. It just simply means I understand where it's coming from. And I think that being intentional and saying, when I go out into the world, I don't want to have an antagonistic relationship with the other people I engage with, is part of the worldview that drives this book, and to me just drives having sort of positive interactions with people.
Yeah, I think that is such excellent advice, not only about anger, but maybe particularly excellent advice about anger, but also just all of the emotions that we deal with. We're social creatures, right? We love interaction. We crave interaction. And so looking at those interactions, can they be the best that they can be? And how can I make sure that I bring my A game to every social interaction that I have? And I feel like this book really gave me some great ways in which I know I can work hard and practice bringing my A game to interactions with angry people. And I have angry people in my life, just like I think a third of people in that study said that they have an angry person who has like a trait, who's consistently an angry person. But also just the interactions with people who are angry in the moment. I felt like
Is it me, Georgina? Am I the angry person?
Well, I didn't want to bring it up on our podcast, but
Okay.
but it's totally justified though.
Yeah, good.
But I feel like it gave me some really great advice. So there are 10 strategies to how that might help us deal with angry people, and we only like scratch the surface of this. Are there any other ones that we should talk about real quick before we go, or do you feel like we're good?
Yeah, I'll say, I guess, two things. One is so the book is really it's broken into two parts. So part one is really about sort of understanding the angry people in our life or in our interactions and where that anger comes from. And I feel like this is an important piece of that empathy building side of this, that getting a sense for where and why some people might be angrier than others, whether it's upbringing or biology or environmental factors or the worldviews they have, and so on. And so that's one thing I really want to highlight, is I think it's the 10 strategies, but then there's also this other almost half the book that's really about just better understanding anger. The truth is, I think in that part, my hope is that people might actually come away sort of better understanding themselves too. That there's some things there that, even though you might not be an angry person, there's some things there that people might sort of see like, oh yeah, I do that, or I understand that, or I've seen that happen, and that can be valuable. And then as far as those 10 strategies go, I think one of the other things that's really important for people to remember is that anger can look lots of different ways. That it doesn't have to be yelling and screaming and hitting people. It can be people cry when they're angry, people problem solve when they're angry, people pout. There's all sorts of different ways that people can channel their anger. And so sometimes dealing with angry people is actually recognizing it and knowing, like, okay, this person who isn't speaking to me, or this person who has discontinued contact with me, is doing that because they're angry with me. I think those are things to pay attention to, and even that can come potentially from different places. That the fact that they've cut off contact might be because they're embarrassed. It might be because they genuinely want to end a relationship. It might be because they're manipulative and they're punishing me, right? There's lots of reasons why people might engage in those things.
Yep. Or maybe they just stopped, dropped, and rolled away.
Yep, that's exactly it. I'm telling you, this might be the most effective strategy. That there should be an 11th strategy where you just stop, drop, and roll. That because I feel like it would work in a lot of situations.
I really do too. I really do too. So before we sign off here, are there questions that you've heard that you think you should have answered that we didn't?
I'm not thinking of any at this point. I feel like we covered most things that people have been wondering and asking. I can tell people the book is available wherever you buy books.
Yes.
So if you're interested in it, you can also visit my website, alltheragescience.com, and there's information about both my books there and all the different places you can get them.
Absolutely. And I think just knowing that this week there are also some readings, some public readings. So if you're on the live episode now, you might be able to catch some even this afternoon. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that there'll be more of that in the future as well. I also thought it might be a great idea to give Watkins a shout out. Yes. You want to say something about the publisher?
Yeah, so the book is published by Watkins, and then it's distributed in the US by Penguin Random House. And I am deeply, deeply thankful for all of the work that Watkins does, especially my awesome, awesome team, my editor, Fiona, and my publicist, Laura. They are both amazing, and I'm super, super thankful for them. Also, the audiobook comes out June 1st. And so that one is available then, and I read it. So I don't know if that's a positive or a negative, but either way, you should go into it forewarned. It'll be my voice. So if that's a good thing, great, buy it. If it's not a good thing, then don't get it.
I bet you that was like a really something else, recording your own writing. That's a strategy that I use to edit all of the writing that I do. And so I am quite sure that you were like, yikes, why did I write that?
Yep. Yeah. No, you really learn what you didn't word the way you wished you'd worded it when you read your stuff out loud. So, yes. Yeah.
But I'm still super looking forward to that. And I think that people who usually listen to their books and the audiobooks will really enjoy hearing it from your point of view and your voiceover. I think it will be really great. I'm super pumped. I'm so lucky that I got a chance to read it early, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate everything that I learned from reading this book. So thanks for writing it, and thanks for sharing it with all of us.
Thank you so much, Georjeanna. That means a lot. So I'm very appreciative that you were interested, and thanks for doing this episode, and thanks for taking time to talk with me. Listeners, I want you to check out @Psych and Stuff on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You will get more information about us and our shows there. Georjeanna, where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on social media at GeorjeannAWD.
Excellent. And you can find me on all the places. That's @AngerProfessor. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the places. So
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yep. As always, got to shout out LinkedIn. Yep. So yes, you can find me in all those places. Thank you so much, G. Psychology and Stuff is a production of Phoenix Studios at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. The executive producer is me, Ryan Martin, and the production manager is Rachel Scray. Our audio production coordinator is Bill Salick, and our graphic designer is Kimberly Blees. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also head over to our website, uwgb.edu/podcast, to check out past episodes of this and all our shows. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and I'm here with my co-host, Georjeanna Wilson-Dunges. Keep being amazing.
Woohoo.